Hey everyone! Welcome to the very first episode of the Genshin Impact Chronicle, a podcast dedicated to the content of Genshin Impact. My name is Jessica, a voice actor and avid Genshin player, and I will be your host. Now, you may be asking yourself, why make a podcast about Genshin? Well, that's because when I first picked up the game about a month after it released, I immediately fell in love with it. I've loved it ever since and have been decidedly passionate about it. So I decided to make this podcast as a way to have some fun and really delve deep into the lore and storylines within the game, with you guys along for the ride. My hope for this podcast is that it is entertaining, insightful, and maybe helps you look at the lore in a different way. For this prologue episode, I wanted to give a brief overview of where we've been and where we're going to go in this podcast. Why is this? Well, in order to understand some of the more complex concepts, we need to start at the beginning and build our foundation. From there, everything else falls into place. For example, we can't talk about Eula's backstory without first knowing the history behind her family. We can't talk about Venti without knowing Mondstadt's history. So, with that in mind, let's get started. Mondstadt is the very first region that we get introduced to in the game. In many ways, it still feels like home to me. Oftentimes when exiting the game, I will teleport all the way back to Mondstadt and leave the game there. There's so many fun memories of this region, meeting colorful characters such as Venti and the OG4, Kaya, Lisa, Amber, and Jean. Learning the backstory of Storm Terror and Mondstadt itself. And of course, we can't forget about the beautiful music of this region. Let's take a listen to a couple of my personal favorites. We're definitely going to take a deep dive into Mondstadt's history, as well as the lore behind some of the characters and regions, such as Dragonspine. A couple of episodes I'm particularly looking forward to, spoiler alert, are the ones on Albedo and Kaya. Talk about a lore treasure trove! Liyue was the next region we entered, and I remember being so overwhelmed as I started playing through the Archon quests. Not only was this region about 2 to 3 times larger than Mondstadt, but it was so much more complex. You had illuminated beasts such as the Adepti and Qilin. You had the Fatui, who became a much more irritating addition to the story. You have the whole governing system of the Qixing, and that darned core lapis that was almost impossible to find as a new player. But the characters were so rich and diverse as well, especially a certain Mr. Zhongli. We'll definitely have an entire episode dedicated to this guy. We've also got exorcists, bookworms, chefs, and funeral directors that make up Liyue, plus so many more. And with regions like Qingce Village and Guyan Stone Forest, there's no lack of content and lore to discuss. Inazuma, though, now that was interesting. I got chills as the cutscene with the Alcor leaving the harbor began to play. We finally were on our way to the closed-off island nation ruled by the Raiden Shogun. I loved Inazuma's design. Again, it was so different from what I was used to with Liyue and Mondstadt. New game mechanics were introduced, not to mention new electro abilities for us travelers. Like Liyue, Inazuma has a rich history, One that I found a bit hard to keep all the information straight, if I'm being honest. But learning about the characters, such as Yaemiko, Kokomi, Toma, and so many more, was absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to discuss many of them with you all. Then came Sumeru, one of the most anticipated regions to date since it finally introduced the Dendro element. Up until this point, the game only included 6 out of the 7 elements, and many of us wondered when the 7th would be introduced. Well, it sure was Dendro's time to shine when Sumeru became available. They made sure to add plenty of Dendro characters to go with it. From the seemingly boring Academia scribe Alhaitham to the energetic Forest Ranger trainee Kale, there was no shortage of new characters. What I loved about Sumeru is that it is so diverse and different from the other regions. Mondstadt is mostly grassy lands with the exception of the small area of Dragonspine. Liyue is mainly mountainous with a few marshy areas and beaches. Inazuma is an archipelago with lush greenery and more beaches. But Sumeru is distinctly divided into a forest region and a desert region. Sumeru was one of my favorite regions, mainly because we got so much lore. The ending of the Archon quest left me speechless as we found out some new and crucial information, things that I never saw coming. I can't wait to talk about it all. Fontaine is the next region that will be unveiled, but as of the recording of this episode, it has not been released yet, and there's no telling when it will be. Seeing as how Sumeru was released pretty recently, it will probably be a little while. We also have the regions of Natlin and Snezhnaya, and we can't forget about Conria. So there you have it, friends, a brief overview of where we've been and where we're going. Genshin is jam-packed with lore, and we're just scratching the surface. I can't wait to dive in and go on this journey with all of you. Ad Astra Abyssosque, travelers!